everyone. This is Josh with a fun Bitcoin, blockchain, and cryptography tutorial for you today. In this video, we're going to be talking about 5 fun cryptocurrency cryptography facts. There's a whole fascinating science behind the crypto that backs the security of the Bitcoin blockchain and of other common cryptocurrencies like Ethereum, Litecoin, and others. So we're going to dive into some interesting facts about this applied cryptography. Our first fact is about the size of the possible private key space for Bitcoin addresses. I think of this as astronomical keys. When we talk about 256-bit keys, which is what Bitcoin uses, that is roughly 2 to the 256 power possible keys. The actual number is slightly less due to the elliptic curve function used in Bitcoin, but it's roughly the same as this number. That is 1.15 times 10 to the 77th power possible private keys. Now that number is so big for a person to wrap their head around, and what makes this an astronomically interesting key space is the fact that in our observable universe, it's estimated that there are roughly 10 to the 82nd power atoms. That's tiny, tiny atoms in our unfathomably large universe. So when we talk about possible Bitcoin keys, there are that many possible keys. People often ask me, is it possible to brute force a key if I lost my backup? Or maybe nefariously, if you wanted to try to steal somebody else's coins, like Satoshi's. And the fact is, it's simply impossible based on this math. Even if you had a theoretically super powerful supercomputer, much faster than anything that we can imagine now, if we're talking about traditional computers, there's not enough energy in the solar system to even flip all those bits, to do all of those operations in an electronic computer. So it's simply impossible to brute force a Bitcoin key if it is generated with proper amounts of entropy. Our next fact is about the sources of hash functions used in Bitcoin. When we talk about Bitcoin addresses, there are 2 hash functions used in the process. One is SHA-256, which gives a 256-bit output, and the other is RIPEMD160, which gives a shorter 160-bit output. What I find interesting about this choice of hash functions is that the original source of the SHA-256 algorithm is from the United States NSA, National Security Agency. But RIPEMD160 comes from COSIC, a European academic institution. And the process of developing RIPEMD160 was done in a more open academic environment, whereas SHA-256, while it's also very widely studied and very widely implemented, sourced from an American intelligence agency. We don't know Satoshi's exact intentions, and it's possible that this choice was simply to have 2 different structures for a hash algorithm. So if something was broken in SHA-256 or RIPEMD, the other algorithm would be less likely to have that same vulnerability. But it's also sort of interesting to think about the fact that he may have done so to prevent any unknown backdoor being put in SHA-256 that would break Bitcoin's security completely. So we have RIPEMD160 as part of the process as well. Since they were developed one by a government institution and one in an open academic environment, it's again less likely that they would have the same vulnerability be discovered in them. So it adds layers to Bitcoin's cryptographic security. Our third interesting fact, somewhat going off of the last one, is the fact that Bitcoin addresses aren't just raw public keys. Most of us that are involved in Bitcoin know it uses public key cryptography. And that's the same for Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin. They all use private keys for you to prove that you're the owner of funds, and then public keys that you use to receive funds to as part of your address. But when you look at a Bitcoin address, it's not just the raw public key from the private key. It's actually a public key that's gone through a couple layers of hashing as well. And this is interesting because what that means is until you spend from a Bitcoin address, and you must reveal the public key so that others on the blockchain can verify your digital signature that you generated using the private key, you don't actually reveal that raw public key yet. If you haven't spent, the transactions sending to your address are sent to the address, which is a public key hash. And only the key hash, which is irreversible, going back to the public key, is on the blockchain until you do a transaction and sign it. So if there's some vulnerability in the elliptic curve algorithm used in Bitcoin, we're still in trouble as a community, but you may not immediately have your coins stolen if you haven't spent from an address yet, because it's hidden behind that hashing algorithm. So I find that kind of interesting. Again, layers to the security of the system. Our fourth fact is an interesting fact about mining probabilities and how Bitcoin mining works. Now, this isn't a full video on mining, but in summary, in order for a batch of transactions to be validated by miners, they take the SHA-256 hash of the proposed block of transactions plus a special random value called a nonce. And the goal for miners that are doing a bunch of these guessing computations is to find a hash output that is below a given difficulty target set by the Bitcoin network by consensus. And essentially what that means, if you think about these as 256-bit numbers, is finding some amount of leading zeros in your hash. And your total number, when interpreted numerically, will be less than that difficulty target. And it turns out that the smaller the difficulty target, that simply means there's less probability for you to find a hash output that matches that criteria. And so what this allows the network to do is roughly set the amount of time that it takes for miners to find a block. So the Bitcoin difficulty target changes as more miners come on and off of the network, such that a block is found roughly every 10 minutes. So if there's a bunch of people putting their computer power into the network, the difficulty target is made smaller so that the rough probability of finding a block within that 10-minute period will stay the same. If miners leave, the difficulty target is adjusted up so that block time can stay roughly consistent with less computing power being put into this guessing problem. So the probability of finding this hash output is done using this difficulty target to keep the network consistent. I just find that very interesting. Our last fact is about seed phrases and what we call hierarchical deterministic wallets. If you've used crypto for any amount of time since about 2014, you know about seed phrases, which you're told to back up. We all back up is a means of restoring our wallet in case we lose the device that our wallet is generated on. And what's so interesting about this is a seed is generally 12 to 24 English words. But this tiny amount of data can be used to back up wallets with unlimited cryptocurrencies, sub-wallets, and addresses. Now, how is it possible to contain so much information in just 12 to 24 words? Well, it turns out what the seed phrase is actually encoding is a seed, thought of in binary. Your wallet generates a random number, and then using a deterministic process, meaning a process that's the same every time, you can generate your sub-wallets, your new keys, and your new addresses, all from one seed. This is done using a function called an HMAC, a hash-based message authentication code. This is a special type of hash that takes a message and a key and gives you an output. So it acts similarly to these hash functions like SHA-256, but with a little bit more data involved as inputs. In the case of HD wallets, we use our seed data that's encoded in the seed phrase, plus the index of our address using this standard wallet derivation process, and then a specially computed bit of data called a chain code to get any given individual key. So using that single seed, we can then generate an unlimited amount of keys and addresses. We don't have to store all of that individually in one backup because the seed using these HMACs gives us all these addresses using the same algorithm every time. So it's sort of like following a recipe exactly, so we end up with these consistent products that we see on the shelf. So I find that very interesting as well. Using just a little bit of random data that we encode into words, we can generate unlimited wallets, unlimited addresses, and back up as many possible transactions as we want. I think that's quite interesting. So this has been 5 fun crypto facts. I want to give a special thank you to everyone that's tuned in to Chain Toots over the years. This is actually my 100th video released on the channel, and I'm very thankful for all the folks that watch and allow me to share this passion for technology, cryptography, security, and education with you all. So as always, I hope you found this tutorial interesting and informative, and thank you for learning something new with me today.